Hello there, I'm Ryan, and welcome to Analyze This Mr. Bond, my channel where I discuss the James Bond phenomenon and the broader tradition of spy storytelling. And today, we are looking back at Casino Royale through the lens of the new Ultimate Casino Royale edition that will be in theaters later this year in October. I was one of a lucky set of Bond fans that got to see a special preview of this new restored version of Casino Royale at Gatherall West in Culver City, California. And I'm excited to share with you my experience, but also to look back at this film, Casino Royale, which is experiencing its 20th anniversary this year. Gee, I feel old. Casino Royale is a very significant film for this channel in general. I began Analyze This Mr. Bond with a series I called The Unified Theory of the Daniel Craig Era, and the bedrock of that is my understanding and interpretation of Casino Royale. This is a film I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I was one of the Bond fans that was able to experience Casino Royale as this really transitional, earth-shattering moment for the series. So it's something that has taken up a lot of space in my brain over the years. Seeing it in this new Ultimate form was a real treat. This Ultimate edition of Casino Royale is not a new director's cut, no new footage has been added, but what it is a lovingly upscaled version of Casino Royale that brings it into 4K with a new sound mix. It looks and sounds better than it ever did before. Yes, there's already a 4K release on disc of Casino Royale, but that process was done pretty hastily. Now Casino Royale looks much sharper. It's really taking advantage of the dynamic color properties of HDR technology. So what you get is a version of Casino Royale that is as lush and vibrant as ever, but it has more natural skin tones, so it doesn't have as much of the orangey green hues that sometimes you get on the home release of Casino Royale. And the sound mix has been what I would describe as almost Nolanified. If you are familiar with Christopher Nolan's films, they have strong emphasis on big, sharp sound effects, and Casino Royale isn't bombastic in the way that a Christopher Nolan film is, but when the sound comes, it comes with a gut punch effect that is really thrilling in the theater, because Casino Royale is a film that has a lot of lulls and then builds up to these exciting moments. And the sound mix here, what they've done with it is so rich, so immersive, so expressive that action sequences hit harder than ever before. It's almost like you are feeling it along with Bond in a way that is really thrilling. So that's what the Ultimate Edition is. I'm excited for you all to get to see it in October. I don't know any details about the release strategy there. We just know that this version will be getting some sort of wide release in October to celebrate this anniversary of Casino Royale. As for the film itself, I haven't seen Casino Royale in full in, I don't know, many years. Probably not since I actually launched this channel. I think watching Casino Royale in preparation for my Unified Theory of the Daniel Craig Era series was the last time I really sat down to watch it. So as much as that movie lives with me in a way that I feel like I know it down to its bones, I hadn't actually sat to watch it from beginning to end in a while. I've watched all the other Daniel Craig movies since then, but Casino Royale has always kind of sat in a special place. It's not one that is casual viewing for me. My main takeaway from this viewing is that Casino Royale is a very, very strange movie. And I mean that as a compliment, because all of the great movies, all of the great works of art have to be strange in some way. They have to give us something we haven't seen before. They have to serve up a combination of things that is ultimately unique to that work in order to survive over the years, in order for us to want to return to it. And Casino Royale has become, since 2006, the de facto gateway Bond movie. If you're looking on the forums, Casino Royale is frequently recommended as the starter point for James Bond. That is pretty incredible, because at the time it was really controversial. It was really uncertain. As someone who saw the transition from the Pierce Brosnan era to the Daniel Craig era, it was this very uncertain experiment. and it still feels pretty bold and radical. It's a different movie than any of its sequels, and it's a different movie than any Bond movie that came before. It just stands alone as this very unique cocktail. It was pulling textures from Jason Bourne and Jack Bauer, that sort of war on terror era of storytelling, but it was also digging into a lot of the pieces that Ian Fleming had established. And so what you get is this film that some people describe as gritty, and it is gritty in the comparison of what came before it. It's gritty compared to the Brosnan run, but it's still fairly fantastical. It feels like you're in a heightened reality. It's very colorful. It's very lush. It makes a lot of attempts to conjure up this sort of old world, mid-20th century glamour in a modern context that puts it in this sort of haze that gives us what we want from a Bond movie, this sort of heightened reality, the sense that you are in a fantasy space. So as much as there is this sense of immediate physical violence that had been missing from some of the prior installments, this sense of a grounded, tactile feeling that pervades all of its action sequences and Daniel Craig's Bond in particular, it's very much part and parcel, part of this larger Bond fantasy. Bond is still a character who is living this sort of glamorous life. Much of this movie is set at this glamorous casino where the villain has set up this impossibly high stakes Texas Hold'em game. Part of the strangeness just comes from the interplay of those elements. You're kind of jumping in and out of things that are a little bit Jason Bourne-esque, and also into elements that are very sort of high Bond fantasy with a lot of the glamour that you associate with it. Some of the attire is even a little bit retro. Certainly Vesper's attire has this sort of mid-20th century Hollywood glamour to it, that you're kind of getting this really singular cocktail. And I think that's one reason Casino Royale has continued to gain momentum as a cultural object, while the Bourne movies, which are still revered, have not quite persisted in the mainstream as much. There is this sort of dynamic quality to Casino Royale that gives it that sort of sweep. So it's easier to return to than something like the Bourne Identity, the Bourne Supremacy, the Bourne Ultimatum. It has a little bit of all worlds. It has some of the best action in the entire series. I think watching this cut, I was stunned by how efficient and effective Martin Campbell's action direction is. The Madagascar chase and the plane sequence, honestly, stunning action filmmaking. I have generally been bored by the Miami airport sequence in prior viewings of this movie, but on the big screen with the sound mix and the added visual quality that has come with this upscaling effort, I was really locked in. And I think that action is of the caliber we haven't seen much since. Those action sequences really, really hold up as a benchmark. The sinking house sequence at the end, not so much. That's not Martin Campbell's fault per se. It's just the setting is a little bit more claustrophobic, so there's a little less room for the kind of grand action sweep that we get in those first two sequences with the kind of thrilling choreography and the really thrilling physicality of Daniel Craig's Bond. Daniel Craig owns this movie. There is a very real sense in which the script of this movie is held together very loosely. Some people will complain to me when I talk about how much I enjoy Skyfall, that Skyfall doesn't have the strongest story, and they will say that Casino Royale has a stronger story. I think Casino Royale has a stronger dramatic through line because of the casting of Daniel Craig and Eva Green, and them being given enough solid material to work with to make those characters more than what they are on the page. But the story is a little herky-jerky. It's a lot of episodes that don't necessarily fit super well together, and we have these sort of big, leaps that are a little bit silly. I think it's always been silly that Daniel Craig's Bond is the kind of agent who immediately gets his 00 and then causes a huge international incident, the likes of which no agent would have any sort of career after whatsoever, and then breaks into his boss's secured flat to hack her computer and somehow gets away with it. I think this movie exists in a a place of really absurd fantasy writing that I think people find fun, but it's not, let's put it this way, the most firm of narrative foundations. But Daniel Craig's intensity is unmatched. No other Bond actor, and I'm going to even put Sean Connery into this list, has come into a Bond movie with such clear command of what they wanted to do with the role. Connery's first appearance as James Bond on screen in Dr. No is one of the great scenes in cinema history. Connery immediately owns the role, but there is this sense that Connery is still figuring out who that character is throughout the rest of Dr. No. In Casino Royale, Daniel Craig knows exactly who his Bond is, and his Bond is a little bit more dynamic and interesting than the character we see in subsequent installments. He's allowed to show more shades, and Martin Campbell as a director is more attentive to Daniel Craig's appearance. On Instagram, I did a post in preparation for the screening just talking about how intensely focused on Daniel Craig's face and eyes Martin Campbell is throughout this movie. Craig's performance animates so much of this movie. I think if you took Daniel Craig out of this movie and cast any other actor, this movie really doesn't work. I don't know that this movie would have worked without someone of Daniel Craig's intensity and caliber and invention, giving all these scenes a level of psychological weight. Because he's just so fascinating to watch, this film really works as a character study. And it works despite the fact that Daniel Craig, honestly, is probably a little too old for the way this story is positioning Bond as this kind of agent finding his footing. At age 38, Bond's recklessness, his hot-headedness, his vulnerability, it feels a little late. It gives Bond in this story a kind of emotionally stunted quality. And sure, that was there in Fleming. Bond would have been in his, 34, 35 in Fleming, so not that far off from the character we're seeing in this film. But Fleming's character didn't have the sort of simmering instability, this sort of violent hot-headedness that Daniel Craig's Bond is showing here. Bond doesn't come off like a seasoned, stable professional here. He comes off as a person who's ready to combust. When he talks to M and says, her mistake might be short-lived, you get this sense that this Bond has a bit of a death wish. So the story becomes about Bond discovering a sense of purpose. He flirts with pursuing a normal human life. He chases the mirage that is Vesper. Vesper is less of a true romance for Bond than this kind of imagined projection. Both Bond and Vesper are projecting their own fantasy of escape on each other, and it's a very toxic, if tragic, relationship. They are naturally drawn to one another, but there's really no opportunity for either of them to have a happy ending. And that experience of Bond flirting with that possibility and then getting so stung by Vesper's betrayal refocuses him on a different purpose that he doesn't have at the beginning of the story, this purpose of chasing the villains who aren't just the lower level thugs, but the bigger machine behind them. It's a heightened version of what Ian Fleming had in the novel, where Bond's betrayal at the hands of Vesper leads him to want to take on the whole of Smersh. In this version, we know it later becomes Quantum, and then in the subsequent films it's also revealed to be Spectre. We'll put that to the side. That's all very convoluted. But here, there's this just tremendous momentum at the end of the story that Bond has discovered some sense of purpose. And the only thing really holding that arc together is the intensity of Craig, the piercing quality of his eyes, and his wonderful ability to kind of portray a man in this sort of emotional turmoil who is also just incredibly tough in a thrilling way. This man is a kind of harrowingly committed soldier on behalf of the British government, and his ruthlessness is somewhat unprecedented in the course of the prior films. Sure, Connery has his tough, slightly psychopathic moments of sadism, and you see that in early Moore years too, and Dalton is a tough character, but you don't really see Bond as this sort of single-minded, ruthless killer, first and foremost, that being the center of Bond's identity until Casino Royale kicks off with a bang and foregrounds that. And of course, having said so much about Craig, we also must talk about Green, who is the foil here. And I think without this sort of chemistry with Craig, and Eva Green has a very natural chemistry with Craig, the most natural of any of his screen partners across the subsequent films, she really lights up the screen. And I don't know that their romance is the stuff of great writing in this film, but man, they are just a joy to watch on film together. And they're able to invest that relationship with a lot of tenderness. I think the moment that so perfectly encapsulates everything that's beautiful about the relationship is that it can sustain a moment like Bond comforting Vesper when she has this sort of PTSD from watching Bond kill a man in the shower. And this is a complicated dynamic between the two of them, especially once you know all the layers of Vesper's backstory that haven't been revealed in the story yet. But she's both victim and perpetrator, and Bond is also the perpetrator of her trauma and also her protector in that moment. And that sort of complicated trauma bonding between the two of them is so beautifully expressed in this singular image that director Martin Campbell captures there as it just kind of pulls back and the two of them are isolated in the shower. It's one of the series' best and most effective images, and it is also the kind of character moment we've never seen the likes of in the series before, and I don't think the series was ever capable of quite manifesting again in the Craig movies that followed. It was a lightning in a bottle moment for the series and Bond's romantic relationships. And I think that's why his relationship with Vesper has such poignancy. For all of my quibbles with this movie, and I have my share, I think the pacing is a little odd. I think the structure is odd to have this opening section where Bond is essentially like an anti-terror operative in Madagascar and the Bahamas and Miami, kind of chasing down terrorists before it just kind of stops for this long, glamorous poker game. The weird, kind of silly nature of some of the things they do with the poker game, the way that the poker hands themselves are exaggerated beyond the point of believability, the way Bond gets poisoned and has this sort of hokey, almost hangover from the Brosnan era, like heart-stopping and resurrection moment, the kind of clunkiness of some of the falling house climax. I think this movie just feels really special because I think there's no other movie that just so fully foregrounds the character of Bond and takes you into who the Bond character is in a way that isn't just depiction, but is actually bringing you into a dramatic journey alongside this character. And it's no surprise that every single Craig movie after this wanted to kind of recapture some of that momentum to really put you alongside Bond in some sort of character journey, because it is really captivating here. And in some ways, if it had just gone back to basics after this, if it had just gone back to a conventional adventure, it would have felt a little strange, because Craig's Bond is just so captivating to watch when he is in these stages of inner conflict, when we're watching him pivot from like hot-headed rage to cool, collected, calm under pressure, to flirtatious, to self-destructive, to filled with love, to filled with anguish. This sort of dynamic version of Bond that we had never seen before was so arresting that it really took, I think, a lot of distance for us to get to a version of the character that we've now seen in 007 First Light that's a little bit more steady in terms of how it approaches who this character is. Because Craig, he's just a dynamo. I said at the time that I thought Craig probably should have received a Best Actor nomination for this role, and I still think that is true. It is a singularly iconic performance, and I hope we all get to relive it again in October, because it's a movie worth celebrating. Bond 26 has a really high bar that it's going to have to meet in order to even come close to what Casino Royale did in terms of establishing a brand new version of the character for a new era. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions about the nature of this ultimate edition of Casino Royale, please feel free to ask in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Let me know how you're feeling about Casino Royale 20 years on. Are you looking forward to the opportunity to see it on the big screen again? I think you should be. I think this is a really special presentation of a special Bond movie. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one.